Hey, everybody. So we're almost at the end of season 2 for our podcast. And when I was going through and listening to some of the episodes, I was thinking, I cannot believe we've gotten this far not having an auxiliary person on the podcast. That is really my mistake. And so I want to try to rectify that because auxiliary are as much a part of the HBCU band experience as the wind instruments or the percussionists. So this week I have Candis Alston-Davis. I have to be upfront and say that she is the daughter of one of my former co-workers who I really care about. And so when it came to mind to who to talk to, she came to mind first. She marched for Essence of Troy, which is the dance girl section at Virginia State University. And so she gets to talk about her experiences and how her dance background prepared her for being successful in Essence of Troy. So without further ado, here's my talk with Candis Alston-Davis. Okay, I am here with a great person. I have had the honor of working with her mother for many years. And the funny story about it is with you, Candis, your mom told me, oh yeah, by the way, my daughter, she works with Champaign at South Carolina State. And I was like, what? Yes. Oh, anyway, I'm here with Candis Alston-Davis, who is a dancer. She danced for Virginia State and was the instructor at South Carolina State for a little bit. And so I just wanted to find out more about you. I'm glad that we got to meet your mom, who is a great person. But how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Just ready for the pandemic to be over.
Yeah, aren't we all? All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. And of course, I'm going to know some of these things, but the people listening are probably not going to know this. So where's your hometown?
Durham, North Carolina, Bull City. I wasn't born there. That's a funny thing. I was born in Opelika, Alabama, but I only spent like 3.5 years there. And then everything else, I was raised full-fledged into Durham, North Carolina. My dad is from there. My mom's from Henderson. So
Right. And both of them graduated from NCCU, so that brought them there, right?
Yes, North Carolina Central was literally in my front yard. So I would walk up to Central's campus to visit my dad, throughout the summer, just about every day to get on his nerves. So
Okay, so let's talk about your dancing career. So how old were you when you first started dancing?
Let Virgie tell you, my mom, I was in the womb dancing, but I remember my first class was about 4 or 5 years old, and I started at the Durham Arts Council. And from there, I just remember someone saying to my mom, I think it was a dance teacher actually, she said, hey, you may want to look into other classes for her. And at the time, I was a little kid, so I didn't understand what that meant, but she meant in terms of just a different level of training. And my mom was like, you sure? And she was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. Because I think I was in like creative movement, be with the wind and all that good stuff at the time. So like most little kids, but she was like, no, you may want to try a different level of classes. My mom just kind of thought about it for a little bit and didn't really, make any moves on it until I watched the episode of Bill Cosby. And he was like, challenge. And I was like, I want to tap. So after that, she put me into dance at Nina School of Dance in Durham. And I danced there for forever until I graduated high school. I also went to Durham School of the Arts though. And I did not go there for high school. I switched over when I was in 9th grade. I decided to go to Jordan High School. But I did learn from Toya Chinflu, who was amazing. And I do believe now she's like over a lot of things DPS in terms of like the dance department. And at the time, Durham School of the Arts was brand spanking new. So I always say we kind of like the little guinea pigs. But it was a lot of fun. I just knew that I wanted to try something else different, but I was really glad that I got introduced to her because that's where I learned African dance training. I had never been trained in African dance before that.
Okay. So before the African training, was it tap, ballet, jazz?
Your traditional, recital, you go and everybody in the back is screaming, oh, that's my baby. Yeah, so ballet, tap, jazz. And then right around 10, I do believe, I auditioned for the dance company. And what I learned later on is that dance company where I'm from versus your stereotypical competition down here in Georgia, because that's where I live now, was totally different. So we had a chance to do a lot of stuff that I didn't realize was such a big deal until I was older. And they were like, you did that? You met that person? I was like, yeah. But I didn't, it doesn't click when you're like 10 and 12. You're like, all right, my dance teacher said dance. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But, I was able to meet some really, really like major dance instructors and choreographers, people that in the dance world, they are huge. They're legends. I met him as like a teenager, not understanding the gravity of everything and the performances that we had.
Okay. So you're still dancing. You at this point you've learned African dance, and you're in high school now. You said you started off at Durham School of Arts. Was that like 9th and 10th grade, and then you went to Jordan for 11th and 12th?
Yep. Well, middle school. So Durham School at the time it was Durham Magnet Center, and then it switched over to Durham School of the Arts. I was there from 6th through 9th. And then I did 10th through 12th at Jordan. And then from there, I went to Virginia State. So oddly enough, at Virginia State, I did not plan on dancing. I knew I wanted to dance, possibly recreational. Like I always kind of played with the idea that like, I knew I was pretty decent. I knew I was good. At that point, I had already done the Miss North Carolina pageant twice as a teenager. And at this point, we're dancing with students that were at East Carolina and Elon because they had a connection through our dance instructors that I, was being taught under. So I'm dancing with these college kids thinking like, oh, it's good. I never really understood the gravity of it all until I was an adult. Like, oh man, I did a lot. So I knew I was pretty decent, but never really thought about going into it professionally. And then I went to Virginia State and I decided to major in mass communications. And I originally was going to go into radio television until I heard my voice being played back to me. And I said, oh, this is not for me.
But you know what, though? I think everybody says that about their voice.
Ooh, that Southern drawl, especially at the time. I feel like now I've worked on it just a bit. But, it was so bad to the point where I was looking at people in my class. I said, oh, girl, who is that? Is that you? Because there was a public speaking teacher.
Oh.
Right. And she played it. And she said, okay, you have to guess who this is. And I was like, oh, was that you? I'm going around the room. No, ma'am, it was you. It was me. Okay. So that's what I learned very quickly. May not be for me. I ended up going into public relations then, and I had a minor in dance. And again, I did not dance my freshman year in the band.
Well, let's pause there. Okay, so yeah. All right, we're gonna pause there. So let's go back to high school, and you ended up going to Virginia State. What made you want to choose Virginia State? Had you seen the Trojan explosion before? Like, tell me about that.
Funny story. I had only heard about Virginia State twice.
Oh.
No. A lot of people were like, oh, you must know. Nope. I knew I did not want to stay in North Carolina. I knew, and I is not to knock North Carolina, but I was such a North Carolina girl and such a Durham girl, and my mom was at UNC, my dad being North Carolina Central. I was already like immersed in everything. And I was like, I want to see what else is out there. Now, mind you, Virginia State is all of an hour and a half, 2 hours away. It's not a big deal, right? But the people there, you're getting a lot of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, got a lot of Cali folks. So I was kind of odd man out by coming from North Carolina. I think there was only one other girl that I knew of at the time in my year that she came from like Riverside. That was it. So I had only seen Virginia State twice. I did not want to go to Howard because I didn't like DC. Now, mind you, this is 18-year-old Candis, okay? No common sense. But I didn't want to go to Howard. And everybody said, well, you go to Howard, you can major. And I was like, no, just not going to do it. I'm okay. And I went to Virginia State's campus and literally fell in love. I love the size of the campus. It wasn't too big. It wasn't teeny tiny. It was just far enough away that, my parents couldn't knock on my front door because my mother would have. Right. So, it was really a happy medium. And my best friend, she was going to Hampton. And I remember when we got our acceptance letters at the same time, there was a clip song that was out. And it said something, I'm from Virginia, what ain't to do but cook. And I sent that to her as like I'm going to Virginia State. And she was like, oh man, somebody in Virginia with me. So literally Virginia State was the perfect in between for me. I did not have to stay in North Carolina, and there was nothing wrong with that. That just wasn't for me. And I didn't want to do like your large, like Howard. Howard just didn't appeal to me also. So it wasn't a knock anything, but it just, everybody has their own fit. And Virginia State was perfect. It was right there in the middle for me. So.
Okay, I understand that. I mean, I'm from Hampton, Virginia, and I didn't want to go to school in Hampton just because of the proximity of it. Nothing against Hampton, but it's just too close. Yeah. So your first year in the Trojan Explosion, you said that was your sophomore year?
It was my sophomore year. So the funny story behind that is I saw the band on campus, and I knew after my freshman year, I was like, oh, I'm going to audition. Like, I have to be a part of this. I've always seen the girl. Now, be mindful, I have more of a classical, technical background. Jazz, and at that time, hip hop actually really wasn't a thing. Like, we were going to dance competitions, and hip hop wasn't even a category. Okay, so this kind of tell you, like, okay, it was still not a thing. So to see an HBCU dance line style, I was like, oh, I like this. Now, what is this about? Mm-hmm. I had seen it on Central's campus, obviously with my dad working there. I had seen it going to the Aggie Eagle. I grew up with the Aggie Eagle Labor Day Classic. So you knew all about Golden Delight. That was, you knew a couple of girls that made it, and they were like, oh, I'm Golden Delight, So, but it still never really appealed to me until I got to Virginia State's campus and I saw it in front of my face. I was like, oh, okay, we have to make this happen. Mm-hmm. So I auditioned my freshman year going to my sophomore year. I danced my sophomore and junior year. I decided actually not to dance my senior year just because I had to make sure I got out in 4 years via Boyd and Berkeley Taylor. So
out of state crew. I feel you.
It was one of those things I wanted to, but they said, hey, sis. But my sophomore year, I danced, and because I had more of a technical background, it was actually not easy for me to pick up on a lot of the dance styles and a lot of the movement. So it was funny. I remember going through auditions, and I remember they would always say, like, oh, she's so flexible. She can dance, she can turn, she can do this. And it was all of the technical aspects because that's, what I knew. But when it came to those double hips and everything, I was like, what is a double hip? And plus, I was teeny tiny compared to everybody else that I was dancing with. I always call them the Amazons. So I was one of the shorter ones of the bunch because everyone was so tall. They looked like a woman. And here I come in, I think I was maybe 110, 115. I was teeny tiny compared to everybody else. I said, I'm just trying to keep up. So, mm-hmm. But no, it ended up working out my sophomore year. And I did not, and I always tell this to my students, I did not dance my very first game because I didn't make the field.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, and I was bitter until I saw the videotape. I was like, oh, okay, that's why I didn't make it. Y'all right. It was one of those things that because I had a technical background, I was like, clearly I can dance. What do you mean I did not make the field? It was like, oh, what is going on? But then I saw who I was standing next to, and I was standing next to a girl that had been doing dance lines since she was in high school. I was standing next to somebody else that she, her the way in which she moved, I was trying to imitate that. So once I saw it, once I had a few sit downs, they were like, Candis, yes, you're good, but you don't look like that. I was like, oh, okay, got it. So, it was very humbling, but I do believe that that's something that band life and culture and just HBCUs in general, I think that's something you cannot get anywhere else. Because I did come in kind of on my high horse, saying, oh, well, I know I'm pretty good. I can make it. And then I didn't make the field for the first game. It was a blow to my ego, but it was also the blow that I needed to say, sit down. You still have a lot to learn. Like, fall back. But, I did make the next game, though. Make sure that.
Yeah, you made that next game.
Oh, yeah. Make sure that there was no more missing games. I was like, all right, we got to step it up. So, yeah, as a matter of fact, the next game was the Norfolk game.
The Labor Day Classic?
Yes. And that was my first time being a part of a Labor Day Classic. That was my first time ever being part of a band battle. I didn't know about this. I went to Jordan. Jordan did not have that type of atmosphere, you know? So coming from a technical background, coming from Jordan, and then being thrown into this, I was like, oh, I love it. I'm terrified, but I love it.
And just to clarify, when you say Jordan, you're talking about Jordan High School.
Yes.
Yeah. So who was your instructor during your time marching? And did you interact with, I'm pretty sure you interacted with them a lot, but then also with Mr. Houghton?
So, okay, Mr. Houghton was gone by the year I got there, but he was still very much so present.
Okay.
So when I got there, it was Dr. Phillips.
Okay.
And Dr. Phillips, his going.
Yes.
We love that. But yes, Dr. Phillips had been there. I think that was his second year, that it was my first year, I do believe. And Selena Scott was my coach at the time. She's still coaching there, I do believe. Yeah, she is, because we just talked not so long ago. But Selena Scott had just started also the year before. So she was into her second year at Virginia State. And she started originally as a clarinet player, I do believe. She was clarinet, and then she danced on Essence. And then from there, she became the coach. Yeah. So, and she let it be known, we're going to get in line. I was like, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask you what was her instructional style like? How would you describe her as an instructor?
She was that. I would have to say she was that gap between the old school and the new school way of instructing. So I appreciated the fact that she was not a complete authority, but she played no games. Like, it was just enough that's like, okay, I'm going to give you guys onus over what you do in terms of like the choreography and, making sure that we took ownership and pride of what we had. But then also at the end of the day, that's who called the shots. If that's what you want to do, this is what's going to happen. So I definitely appreciate that. There were a lot of things that just in general, work ethic wise, that you learn about her, if not during the process, definitely after the process. You're like, oh my gosh, Selena did everything. But there's one thing in particular I always take. It's a quote that she said, practice makes permanent. And I use that to this day with every student that I have. Practice makes permanent. It does not make perfect, because what you practice is what you're going to show out there on that stage or on that field. So if you're practicing the wrong thing, that's what's going to happen on the stage or on the field. She said that every day, and I was like, yep, got it.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the matchups. I know the Norfolk State matchup is probably going to be big, because that's like always the Labor Day Classic, the first big meeting of the season. Did you get to meet any of the other dance teams that you faced off against?
It was so different now. Like, I will say, like, it was so different when I danced from the year and a half that I was with Champaign to even now. It's so totally different. So, CIAA was different in general, right? So we're smaller. It's not this huge hoopla, if that makes sense. Not like SWAC. Like, I didn't really learn about SWAC until after college, and my husband went to Southern. He graduated from Southern. So I didn't know, I knew about SWAC, but not a lot, right? And then, of course, I knew about MEAC, but MEAC was always kind of like the bigger brother to CIAA, or where you moved up to once you left CIAA. So, it wasn't a lot of interacting with other dance lines, but when you did, it was always cordial. It was, hey, girl, how you doing? Honda was probably the best example of that, where we were all kind of together and we were kind of chit-chat with folks, you just kind of waiting to perform, or you were waiting to get instructions to do something. So I know a couple times I struck up a conversation with, I want to say it was somebody from Jackson and, just other schools, but I knew girls because of dance, and then they happened to be on the dance line, if that makes sense. So if I knew them from North Carolina, I probably knew them from what studio did you go to, what competition did you do. We knew each other from the dance world, and it just so happened that it transferred over into HBCU dance lines. But, we were very subdued compared to, I would say, probably the group that came before us, because I know Tracy. I love me some Tracy. So for everybody who has no idea who we're talking about, Tracy. Tracy was my captain at Virginia State. Tracy has all the energy in the world. You had to match Tracy's energy in order to survive, okay? But Tracy was very honest and upfront, still is, very blunt individual. And Tracy's, this sticks out in my head when we say matchup. Her matchup against Bowie to this day goes down the CIAA legend because it's hilarious. I love Tracy. I said, Tracy, you just didn't care. She was like, no, it's game time.
Had somebody on the podcast last week that was affiliated with Bowie's band program. So I want to know this legendary story that you're talking about. So I can ask him to see if it is true.
If my memory serves me correctly, Tracy was leading and they kept getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And then I was like, okay, hold on. So, it got a little interesting, got a little dicey there afterwards. I think some interesting words may have been exchanged. I don't really know. But, Tracy was never one to back down. That was the one thing that I picked up from her more than anything. Like, anybody's going to say anything about you because you're an easy target. You're supposed to be the face of the band. So, you have to, number one, stand up for yourself, but also make sure you can always back it up. And Tracy stood up for herself. She always backed it up. She did not back down to anyone. And I loved it.
Okay.
So it was one of those like, okay, I see where this is going. But yeah, my group, we came in after Tracy. Tracy was over us my sophomore year. And then it started my junior year with one girl, but then I ended up switching over and doing captain towards the end of the season. And we were a tight group. Like I will say, looking at that group of girls, especially that second year, it started to be more of a changeover to this newer style that you see that's a bit more flamboyant. Still very much so connected to HBCU dance line. We were known for being very fast in our movement, but I definitely think around that timeline, because let's see, it's like 06. So 06, 07, 08, 09 is definitely when you start to see like a different group of girls come in, and it's more technical. It's even faster. Like it's just, you're like, oh, okay, I like where this is going. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see that evolution. That I'm sure the evolution of watching those dance lines are interesting. So I have a question about, because you were in Essence of Troy, because that's the name of the line, right? Okay, so with Essence of Troy, how are you all received on campus? Because like from the outside looking in, all you hear about at Virginia State are the woo-woos. And I know that's it's like the woo-woos this, woo-woos that. Like, were you received as well? Was Essence of Troy received as well as like the woo-woos on campus?
It's so funny because we're called the jewels of the CIAA. So a lot of times I think people get us, I don't want to say confused, but when they see people dancing, they don't realize it's two separate things, right? Mm-hmm. So what I have noticed is that this is more of an East Coast thing, if that makes sense. So you get a lot of like, I didn't know the name of Scarlet Lace until I knew people that were on Scarlet Lace. I knew about the cheerleaders first. You know, it's one of those things that my assumption is that it's more of an East Coast thing, because on campus, it was like, oh, that's Essence. Like everybody knew, like they don't call us Essence of Troy. They go, that's Essence. Or they call us Essence, like, oh, is that an Essence girl, or, whatever. Like my best friend, she was a woo-woo and I was an Essence dancer. So it was hilarious. Like we would go places and like, oh, my two favorite, whatever. But yeah, you knew about the woo-woos though because of Doc. And I think that was for Virginia State, that was like the deciding factor, if that makes sense. Doc was very well known at Virginia State. She is all things amazing. If you ever get a chance to talk to her, she's like great. Dr. Johnson. But she was the one that really she started the woo-woos, I do believe.
Because I remember the woo-woos being a thing in the 80s, like,
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, like she made sure like you knew these are the woo-woos. But also Essence of Troy was with the band. So it wasn't like, I didn't realize that it meant such a huge distinction from the band versus dance line until I started talking to people that were SWAC. And they're like, oh yeah, well this group and that group. And I was like, oh, because it's just so kind of flip-flop. The only group that I knew of outside of their cheerleaders was just Golden Delight.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. Everybody else always knew about their cheerleaders first, and then their dancers were the band dancers.
Mm-hmm.
So it was so funny to me that everybody was like, "Oh yeah, woo!" So I was like, "Yeah," and they're like, "Essence." I'm like, "Here."
Yeah, that's fascinating to me because I grew up with going to CIAA and all that kind of stuff, and I just remember like the cheerleading competitions that they would have and stuff like that. And yeah, but this is completely separate. So I want to make sure to highlight Essence of Troy and the stuff that you've done with Essence of Troy, because this is a band podcast. Although I love cheerleaders, this is a band podcast.
I have love for the cheerleaders though, I have love for them, but it was so funny because with my roommate being a cheerleader, she would ask, she goes, "What cadence are they gonna play for this? Or what cadence?" Because they still end up dancing and cheering to the band cadences. So I would always kind of like help her out, like, yeah, we use this, and it's gonna sound like this.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about like after you graduate. So tell me what your career progression was, and like I know you always have stayed in the dance field, right? So tell me about maybe the transition from you marching at Virginia State, you graduate, and then you become the instructor of Champaign at South Carolina State.
I'm a crazy lady. So I've always been a person that I know that I want to stay in a certain lane. I just like to see what areas in that lane are for me and what works. So I always say I backdoored my way into teaching dance because I knew that I could dance. It doesn't necessarily mean that I like being in the front for dance. That's the thing that I think it always surprised people. And I'm like, I'm good. So I performed professionally for 3.5 years. I danced down here in Atlanta. I did the African American Dance Review. I did a bunch of TV shows. I choreographed for what was that show? It was Drop Dead Diva. I don't know. It's probably old now. When I said it to my students, they were like, "Who?" I said, "Oh, I feel my age." I did work down here, along with the fact that I've always taught in dance studios while I've been down here. At one point, I was teaching at 5. I was also running a dance workshop series that was in Richmond, Virginia. We traveled to Chicago. We traveled to Florida. We had a couple times in North Carolina. I've done that. I've done agency work. I've done management work for dance crews in Chicago and also here in Atlanta. Traveled to, California, traveled to Dallas to work with World of Dance. So this is actually World of Dance way before what you see on TV. Mm-hmm. So what a lot of people probably don't know is, if you not in the dance world, World of Dance originally started almost kind of like undergroundish, and it was very hip hop. Like this is super commercial compared to what it originated as. So I worked with a group that performed for that. So I've done a lot. Like I literally, you name it, I probably stepped my toe in it.
Okay.
but at the time, I want to say this was 2011 or 2012. At this point, my years started to run together. So I want to say it was around about 2000, probably 12, somewhere around there. But I was teaching at multiple studios, and a mutual friend of mine, she works with a lot of the high school dance lines here in Atlanta. She said, "Hey, they're looking for a coach for South Carolina." And she told 2 of us, and my other friend was like, "No, I don't want to do it. I've done my thing with high school. I'm okay." And I was like, I was super duper reluctant because I had actually never worked with a collegiate team before. I had gone back and worked at Virginia State with Selena, like working with the girls and doing workshops. And I taught adult classes. But when it came to actually being a coach, I just remembered all the grief that we gave Selena. So I was like, I don't know about this. And she was like, no, I think you'd be really good. The girls are, a good group of girls. And I was like, okay, we'll see how all this works out. I want to say I was probably about 26. That was also my other fear too. I felt like I was really too young, and I still kind of stick to that. I was probably a little too young, but it worked out. So I went down to South Carolina, or went over to South Carolina, and I worked with them for a week. And there was another young lady that was there also at the same time. She worked with them for a week, and then she actually got the job over me. So that was the thing that a lot of people, they were like, oh, well, I thought you was like, no, I didn't start with them. So that season, the other young lady started, but unfortunately, I guess it just didn't work out with her. And then towards the very end of the season, 'cause I think I did like maybe 3 or 4 games max with them. And then I did Honda that year with them. So that was the year that I knocked out, I think like 2 parades and a few games, and it worked out. And it was, you know, one of those like, hey, can you come back for next year? And I was like, oh, I don't know about this. Just because it wasn't my plan. You know, at that point, I really was sticking steadfast to dance studios. I kind of made up my mind that I wanted to possibly go back to school and get my master's in dance education. I was just kind of moving down a different track. And they were like, no, you know, it'll work out. And also I would have had to move to South Carolina. And I was like, okay, we'll figure this out. So I gave it a year to try and see if just the commute would work. And it did not. And I mean, it was to the point where I was drinking Red Bull like my life depended on it, right? And just to, I think, working with the girls, they were great. Some of them drove me slightly insane. But I remember, like I said, the grief that I gave Selena along with everybody else. So it was par for the course. It wasn't anything crazy, but I just could not devote my full time and still be in Georgia. And literally, I was running a studio at that time. So running a studio, let's see, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, parts of Sunday, I'm in South Carolina. It just wasn't working.
Yeah.
So that was it after that. I was like, it's been lovely. I loved it though. You know, it was a different lane that I didn't think that I would like to coach, if that makes sense. Just because I know all of the things that go behind it. So the fact that I did it and I did it so young, I think if I were to do it now and I was older, good. Because I would be cemented in, okay, this is what I want. But just being that young and trying to figure it out, I'm glad that I was able to do it. But I was like, oh, that age was a little different. Because truthfully, when I look back, we were like, the girls and I that I was coaching, we probably played in the sandbox together, you know? So it was, I can understand how they probably looked at me sometimes like, no, what is she talking about? Because we almost the same age. I totally get it, you know? But yeah, I enjoyed the experience though. And they did great at Honda. So that's what I cared about at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So you marched in Honda, because I know that was when Virginia State went those 9 years in a row. Of course, you didn't do all 9, but
got my 2.
Yeah, you did too. Okay, so you marched at Honda, and then you coached at Honda. That must have been a real interesting experience.
It was so funny being on the opposite end. That's why I was like, I don't know. You know, it's almost like stepping into a pair of shoes that are too big for you, and you know they're too big, but you keep walking anyway. It was one of those. I was like, well, we're just gonna keep walking. And again, they did a great job. I just think had it been 10 years after that, I would have been in a totally different headspace and would have been more prepared just for everything all together. But yeah, after a year of dropping back and forth, I was like, I don't think this is gonna work for me. I didn't want to move either to Orangeburg. I had so much going on here in Atlanta that I didn't want to move at the time. I will say that year that I took them to Honda though, it was so funny because my coach was there, Selena, and Jackson State was also there. So what a lot of people don't know is that Virginia State and Central Troy, we originated from Jackson State. We originated from J-Sets. So to have Jackson State, Virginia State, and South Carolina State, literally all 3 of us were right there together for mass band. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
That is cool, and I did not know that. I love it.
Yeah, those things I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. But yeah, I'm glad for my experience. Now, I will say one of the young lady, she did not come in directly after me, but the young lady that is there now, she is doing an amazing job. Oh my gosh, she is doing great. I spoke with her not too long ago. She is like the bomb.
Yeah, all right. So what are you doing now? What's going on with you now?
So I am an educator. I'm a dance educator. I am teaching middle school and high school students. I work with 2 different dance studios. I am an assistant director at one. I'm a competition director at another. And then I'm also starting almost like a dance advocacy group for students that want to go to college and major in dance, minor in dance, or possibly dance on the dance line, because there are literally 3 different avenues that you can take. And a lot of times students don't have that information readily available. So I can't tell you how many times I've gone to guidance counselors. I'm like, hey, what do you have for this student about, this program? And they know nothing. And it's no knock to them. It's just, that's not their expertise. And even working with some of my students at the dance studios, they go to a school that's a school of the arts. And I'm like, oh, it's great. So clearly your guidance counselor must know about the deadline for this program, or nothing. So now that I've kind of narrowed my lane a bit, I definitely know I want to stay in dance education. Again, I feel like I so totally backed into it, but because I didn't want to teach. I was like, oh no, I'm not going to teach dance. And I just ended up loving it. I love literally every aspect of teaching dance, and especially getting kids into programs that they have worked hard for and that they deserve. So like right now, I have a few that are in college. I have a couple at Marymount, Manhattan, in New York. I have one at FSU. I have one that actually made the dance line at Hampton. So, I'm working with these students because I know they have the talent, but they may not understand all the resources that are available to them. And I just want to get it out there to them.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I have one last question for you. And I want you, you may want to think about this a little bit, but tell me about some of the lessons that you took from your time marching for Virginia State. And do any of them come into play now with what you do?
Oh, Lord, yes.
Okay.
Gosh, hard work actually pays off. I think in this group, this generation, this day and time, everything's instant. Everything's a microwave situation. And if I, don't have my pirouettes, or if I don't have this, and if I don't have this flexibility by this time, then there's no point. No. Hard work pays off. So you put in the work, you will see the change in what you're trying to accomplish. Also, speak up. Speak up. Sometimes you have to make yourself known. You may be the little person in the back, but the little person in the back may hold a whole lot of punch. So sometimes you have to speak up, like, hey, I got it. We're good here. Another one would go back to that, practice makes permanent. That is a statement at the end of the year. For all of my high school students, I put up on the board quotes that I've said throughout the year, and they all say the same thing: practice makes permanent.
Okay. All right. Well, then that's a great way to end things. It was so good talking to you. It's so good talking to you. And like I said, man, I've got to call your mom because she rocks. But anyway.
Yes, please. Now, you may be on the phone for 2 hours, but yes, absolutely give her a call.
You have listened to the HBCU Band Experience with Christy Walker. Interviews and editing conducted by yours truly, Dr. Christy Walker. The music is District 4 by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find this podcast on hbcubandexperience.podbean.com. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Take care.